First of all, can we just be clear about one thing? This week in that vote on the COVID strategy or COVID tactics, will you be supporting the government's Plan B?
We've consistently put public health over party politics. So yes, we will be, because we do need to protect public health.
It looks from what we've been reading, and indeed from what the Secretary of State said for Education said this morning, talking about the extraordinary exponential growth of Omicron, that they will have to go further. Will you support a Plan C, for example, a further lockdown?
Well, before any additional restrictions should even be contemplated, we've got to see government urgently taking a number of actions. They should be boosting the booster programme. We're far behind where we need to be. We haven't seen those retired staff being pulled back in, those volunteers being pulled back in for the booster like we saw initially. That's got to happen now. We need to see action on our schools. We've got less than half of the young people who should have been vaccinated by now actually having been vaccinated. The government doesn't seem to have any plan for ventilation in schools. All they're saying to teachers is just open the windows. We'll try doing that in December in lots of parts of our country. And of course, they haven't fixed sick pay either. So there's a huge amount the government must do urgently, and they must do that before they even contemplate looking at any additional restrictions. This is very urgent now.
So ventilation, a bigger drive for jabs for young people and so on. You wouldn't go any further at this point, for example, extending vaccine passports?
Well, look, we really need to get those other measures in place, because we know that ultimately the vaccine is the strongest barrier against this disease progressing, particularly with the Omicron variant there. And we've got to boost that booster programme. That's going to be the strongest defence. As you know, Trevor, we've got those plans that will be coming through around the vaccination of NHS staff. Now, actually, we want to see government working very, very hard, as the Welsh Labour government has done, actually, to make sure that NHS staff have all the information about the vaccine, that there's a really strong education and encouragement programme there. That will drive up uptake. If ultimately that doesn't get us far enough, then we will not oppose a passport scheme for those NHS staff. But really, government should be learning from what's worked elsewhere. And the Conservatives seem to be unwilling to do that, even though those education and encouragement programmes have been so successful in Labour-run Wales.
There's one estimate that says that the NHS could lose more than 100,000 staff because of mandatory vaccines. You would still insist that NHS staff were required to have vaccinations at some point if persuasion doesn't succeed?
Well, the government has set out a timetable of this beginning in April. So they've got a number of months to really focus on that education and encouragement. And, this is not about remaking the wheel. As I said, they've got a very good example coming from Cardiff with the Welsh Labour government there, where they worked incredibly hard to get the message out, to combat disinformation, to make sure also the vaccination was very, very easy for NHS staff to take part in. And that drove up those levels. They're significantly higher amongst NHS staff in Wales compared to in England. That ultimately is what should be focused on. But if it doesn't get us as far as it needs to, the evidence that we've seen suggests that mandatory vaccination for the NHS staff may have to still be on the table in April. So we're not going to be arguing against it for the sake of it.
All right, let's turn to politics. Do you have confidence in the proposed or the ongoing Cabinet Secretary investigation into Christmas parties and all of that?
Well, I wish it was into Christmas parties and all of that, because it isn't an investigation that will be looking into all of the different parties that we've seen evidence of. More.
Well, actually, I think they announced yesterday that they were extending it.
Well, I am encouraged if they genuinely are, because until recently, the suggestion was it would only cover effectively one party. But frankly, of course, this is going even beyond number 10, because we have now heard that there have been social events which, for example, the former Education Secretary took part in. So we've got to have full transparency around that. The Prime Minister must make sure that he is very open about everything that he knows. Just a few days ago, the Prime Minister suggested he knew nothing about any parties, and then he ordered an inquiry into one of them. This is a very strange set of affairs. And I think British people are really fed up with all of this chaos, with all of the sleaze that's engulfing the Prime Minister. He's got to get a grip now, and our country's facing massive challenges. They need a government that actually is adequate to face up to those challenges, rather than one that's just engulfed in sleaze.
Are you? Is it time for Labour to be calling for the Prime Minister to stand down at a time of national crisis? Wouldn't that be a non-partisan thing to do?
Well, obviously, I'm a Labour MP, so from a partisan point of view, now I'm working every day to try and get a new government in place, to try and get the Conservative government out. But when it comes to the Prime Minister's position, that's ultimately in the hands of the Conservative Party, and I do want them.
Yeah, but come on. You've been telling us how important this is for the country, that you're interested in the country rather than party. We have a leader that your own leader says is not fit for office. And this is not a party political thing. We need a Prime Minister who's going to lead us through this crisis. Surely, if you really believed that, you would be saying it is time for Boris Johnson to resign and allow somebody who can lead the country effectively to take the keys to number 10. So, is it time for Boris Johnson to stand down or not?
We've been very, very clear that he's unfit for office, but ultimately the resignation of a Conservative Prime Minister is in the hands of the Conservative Party, not the hands of the Labour Party. And what we've been urging week after week, month after month, is for this Conservative Party to get a grip, because for as long as it doesn't get a grip, working families in our country continue to pay the price.